this is Sarah Colburn and Hannah Dooley, and welcome to Crash Course. Today, we're talking about Quebec. Now, many European nations had colonies in the Americas, but Quebec was New France. It was France's largest chunk of land in the New World. It was a colony centered around trade, mainly fur trade, with its main export being fur and lumber. Though I shouldn't get ahead of myself, though, eh?
Before colonization by the Europeans, there were local natives, now called First Nations in Canada, living in the area that's now Quebec. Unfortunately, as our societies relied on oral tradition, there is very little record of the time before the Europeans arrived. In 1608, though, Quebec City was founded by the French explorer and navigator Samuel de Champlain. The red outline shows the territory of Quebec as of 1774. The brown outline shows the current territory of Quebec, which is located at 46 degrees north, 71 degrees west, and is part of Canada. Now let's look at the timeline of the city.
Quebec was founded at the native Iroquois town of Stadacona, which had first been found by the French in July 1534 by Jacques Cartier on his trip to chart the St. Lawrence River. Anyway, back to the issue at hand. The founding of Quebec City led to a large string of trading settlements along the St. Lawrence River. This created the region of New France, also nicknamed Le Canada, from an Iroquois word meaning settlement or village. New France was the embodiment of the European philosophy of mercantilism. France sought to have maximum financial and commercial benefits from the colony with little imperial investment present. New France, or Canada, grew largely up until the 7 Years' War, also called the French and Indian War. In the French and Indian War, Quebec was taken over by the British and at the end of the war was given up by the French king to the English, according to the Treaty of Paris 1763. Even though it has been under English-speaking power for over 200 years, Quebec remains with a majority of French-speaking population, the only province in Canada to do so. By 1791, though, Canada was split into Upper Canada, Ontario, and Lower Canada, Quebec. Quebec, during its time as Lower Canada, was upraised in the Lower Canada Rebellion of 1837-1838, but the rebellion was quickly squashed by local British troops. It would not be until 1867 that the British North America Act established the Federation of Provinces now known as Canada. Since this point, Quebec has served as an important Canadian province. There were a number of meetings held here during World War II in Quebec City that established the landing plans for D-Day. Quebec has lost many interest in Canadian politics since the 1960s, but still remains an iconic part of Canadian culture. In the 1960s, however, Quebec underwent a quiet revolution in which authority over the school system was reclaimed by the state from the Catholic churches. The Quiet Revolution was led by the Liberal Party leader in Quebec, Jean Lesage. In the Quiet Revolution, electrical companies were nationalized to create Hydro-Quebec. This is typically seen as the birth of a modern Quebec province. Although its economic heyday is long gone, Quebec City remains a bright and prosperous location. Montreal has overtaken Quebec City as the most populous city in Quebec. However, it is definitely a 21st century city as well as a historical location.
So let's talk about demographics. In the early settlement of Quebec, men greatly outnumbered women. The lack of women and the large amount of desperate French traders led to marriage of native women and French fur traders. Their children became absorbed in their mother's culture and eventually became a large cultural group. In a little less than 100 years, Quebec experienced large population increase. From 1665, with only 500 people and 70 houses, Quebec population grew dramatically to almost 8,000 inhabitants in 1763. The question is why? Why did this huge population increase occur? This is probably due to trade.
The main export for the historical settlement of Quebec was fur. This began as an exchange between First Nations and Europeans during the 1500s. Native populations traded fur in exchange for European tools and weaponry. Early fur traders in North America were French explorers and fishermen, such as this man, that settled in Quebec. Demand grew in Europe throughout the 1500s, especially for beaver pelts, leading to further European exploration of North America. When Quebec City was established in 1608, it acted primarily as a trading post for the constantly expanding fur trade. This fur trade was largely controlled by large European countries, the largest of these being the Hudson's Bay Company, which was established in 1670. The Hudson's Bay Company was created by a group of English businessmen with 2 French fur traders. They were given sole trading rights to the whole region of Hudson's Bay by the English government, hence their large impact. However, the fur trade became fiercely competitive between English and French in the region. which culminated in the French and Indian War. Later, more competition emerged in the fur trade when Russia began the Russia-Alaska Company in 1799 to establish fur trade in the region now known as Alaska. Around the same time, other regions began to contribute to the declining of fur trading from Quebec. A major factor was excessive land clearing, an act that leads to less fur-bearing animals in the area. Fur prices also dropped sharply in the 1830s with the re-emergence of silk, and most fur trapping and trading activities in the area had ended by 1870. Another item traded in the area was timber. Timber trade initially began with the New England colonies and spread towards the St. Lawrence River region of Quebec. This led to the shipping of timber through Quebec City before its shipment to Europe. Although timber trade quickly spread to the Ottawa River system, most timber was still sent to Quebec City as the main trading post on the way to Europe. Timber became the most high-profit export of British North America by the early 1800s. By the second half of the century, timber trade declined, but cut lumber and pulp and paper both flourished as industries. The ships used to export timber were very important, though, as many very cheap tickets for those wanting to immigrate were used to fill cargo space. Although the ships were not great, wars taking place in Europe, such as the Napoleonic Wars, made immigration a popular offer. In 1842, the British preferential tariffs were lifted, though the transatlantic trade remained a profitable trade industry for a century later.
Now let's talk about religion. Religion was especially significant in Quebec lifestyle. The founding of Quebec could be called a Catholic city. Catholicism was integrated in everyday life and played a huge role in the lives of civilians through religious practices and by Catholic-based legislation. However, other religions were permitted to be practiced in private. Due to a mostly Catholic population, after the English invasion, the British allowed citizens to continue practicing Catholicism through the Act of Quebec in 1774. The Notre Dame de Quebec Cathedral in Quebec City was initially built in 1647. It has burned down 3 times since its first building, but remains standing today.
And now it's time for our open letter. So what even was the heyday of Quebec? Quebec's heyday initially began with the creation of Quebec City in 1608 by Samuel de Champlain. This boosted trade in the area and created a civilized center for the beginnings of New France. In the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, Quebec City was lost to the British during the 7 Years' War in 1759. Although painted long after the battle, this painting still captures the atmosphere of the war. It was officially ceded over to England as a colony by the French in the Treaty of Paris 1763 at the end of the 7 Years' War. Arguably, the heyday in Quebec ended at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in 1759, in which the British overtook the French control of Quebec City. Although the city still remained important in trading in lumber and fur for a few hundred years afterwards, it never regained its initial importance in the Americas.